And we are live, good to go.
Excellent. Welcome everyone to our final 10 Forward event for this leadership contest. My name is Amita Kuttner and I am a candidate for leader of the Green Party of Canada. I am speaking with everyone tonight from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And with that, I would also like to acknowledge that colonialism is ongoing, and those of us who are settlers should lean into the work of taking responsibility and undoing historic violence and current violence. The idea of these events that we've been hosting every week, named after 10 Forward, which is a reference to Star Trek, because we were exploring the possibilities of our future, what the space ahead can look like with that concept that Star Trek, I think, brings to us in its imperfection of wanting a world where we are past scarcity, and we could be if we made the choice to be right now, and that everyone has the chance to live meaningful lives and to explore. And I certainly, as an astrophysicist, would like to get to exploring the universe, but that's really hard to do when your entire existence is in jeopardy. But the idea of this is to have a casual setting to talk to people who have experience in different areas, whether it's politics or policy, and ones that I think that other people will be better at speaking about than me too, so that we get a range of information. So tonight, our guest is Abhijeet Manay, who is the Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Ontario and one of the few people that says my name right. And so I will give a bit about my background and then let him introduce himself. Tonight's discussion topic is the idea of leadership and experience and how we can be effective. I am an astrophysicist. I've done a bunch of organizing both in academia and outside, both for diversity and political representation, and wanting to make sure that we have a sustainable and just future regardless. And also for the party, I was science and innovation critic from 2018 to 2020, and I ran as a candidate in Burnaby North Seymour. And I've been finding that I have a bunch of experience that I got from a bunch of places that is not easily encapsulated in a resume, but has informed what I think. And so hopefully we'll get to discussing a bit about that tonight. The format is I will host and interview our guest for the first half, and then we'll have open questions and answers from the floor, and Anthony will moderate that. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name is Abhijeet Manay. I come to you from the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit Nation. Thank you so much, Amita, for having me here, and it's such a pleasure to be with all of you. I am the Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Ontario, as they mentioned, and And my experience and my worldview about politics has largely been shaped by Star Trek. So this is actually so apt that I get to be on segment titled 10 Forward, because so much of my childhood, so much of my formative years, so much of who I am today is because of Star Trek, as nerdy and geeky as that is. But I love that we're celebrating that, because Star Trek is such a fantastic way not to just tolerate diversity, but celebrate it. And that is one of its founding principles. And I love that about that show, and that it looks towards the future where we have conquered disease, we've conquered war, we've conquered poverty, and all those things that, you know, are part of the quote unquote human condition. But it's such a liberating vision to look forward. And because, you know, nowadays everything, all pop culture is just saturated with this dystopian, gray, bleak visions of the future. So I love that Star Trek instead chose to look ahead and say, hey, we're going to do something great, that we're going to come together and we're going to create a world that serves everyone. And so I love that's the crux of this entire show. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to answering your questions and learning more about everyone here.
Oh, well, that, you know what I'm going to start with? I'm going to start with saying that I spoke about this a couple times, but actually on our campaign Slack, on my team, which I'm so grateful for the community we've built and the space that we have. We've kind of dug into it, and we all have Star Trek characters, or most of us have Star Trek characters as our pictures.
Yes. So
And I decided that I wouldn't pick my own character. So most people, you basically, it's not dependent on rank. You can pick your character. Then we're our own crew. And I let the crew choose my character, and they gave me Captain Picard, and I have never been more honored. So my first question to you, though, and I'll tell you, I suppose, here, I hope Anthony doesn't mind, but this is my first officer, Dax. So if you'd be willing, who would you pick from any? It could be from any of the series too, because we're jumbling them up.
And it doesn't have to be captains. Like, you can pick any.
It can be anything, any character from any. Yeah.
Huh. Wow, that's a tough one. It's either Spock or Worf, and for some like it's just they're the odd ones out on both of their ships, right? Like they're the ones that completely stick out, and it for some reason always resonated with me about Spock's drive for logic, but at the same time wrestling with emotions, being a child of two worlds. I'm an immigrant, and I came to Canada when I was 15, and so I've always felt like I was a child of two worlds. Now I turned 30 in May, and so I've completed exactly the same amount of time in India as I have lived in Canada. So it's almost equal now, and so yeah, that sense of conflict always, I guess, is what drove me towards Spock. And Worf is, again, it's very similar there as well, and as well as the fact that Worf is just hilarious. He just is so funny. I love some of the lines that he has in that show. But yeah, the sentimentality at heart about being a person who's not supposed to be there and yet is accepted. It kind of is very sweet.
Well, I got chills from that, as I have to say, I'm a mixed race, so my experience has definitely also, I felt so torn between multiple worlds, and I've also kind of have a cultural identity that goes beyond the two racial identities I've had. And so I've also kind of maintained that if I was a Star Trek race, that I would actually be half Vulcan, half Betazoid, because it's all logic and all empathy, and there's it's the simile of a human in the end of it, but it also mirrors that experience of mixed worlds and being drawn and pulled and pushed away as well.
For sure.
Well, my first question tonight is that since you are an unelected deputy leader working with an elected leader, what is that like? And I say, I'm asking for a friend, but I'm asking for whoever wins this leadership race is going to be outside of the house working with a fantastic caucus of three, and I want to know how best to help.
Yeah, no, I think it's such an incredible learning experience. I became deputy leader in 2018, so it's about 2 years, September. And I've learned so much just being around Mike. Mike Schreiner, obviously, I knew him before he was elected, and he had affected so much change even before that. But just the amount of things that he's done since he's been elected, it can differ from, vary from all things like learning the minutiae and the specificity of political, the actual Queen's Park legislative procedures, to how to scrum with the media, to how to create effective political strategy, creating effective political coalitions to combat any kind of the government's horrific plans, let's say, and I'm saying that to put it mildly, yeah, I think he has been sitting as an independent because, he's a caucus of one. He's been able to punch way above his weight. And whether that's, the amount of media coverage that he gets, to the amount of change that he's been able to affect, again, like I said, with building coalitions across different groups, it's been so inspiring. So that's what I love, is the proximity to the action, because it's right there. And despite being a caucus of one, he has been able to do so much. So to have a front view seat of that has been just a joy.
It's great. That leads directly into my next question, which is about effective governance. When you have a small caucus, and I think in general, we see this everywhere with Greens elected. You have a small group of Greens and they do so much with just a few. And so what is it like? What is it like working with a small group to have large impact? And kind of what is the best, or what are the best and most effective approaches towards getting stuff done in that context?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I mean, even if you look out east to the New Brunswick Greens or the PEI Greens, and just the amount of amazing change that they've been able to create in their provinces. I actually helped campaign on Megan Mitten's campaign the last election, not the most recent one. And although I did make a few calls, and as well as the PEI, I helped out in the Charlottetown campaign. So I know these people, personally, and they have just like, I've been following their story ever since, and just the amount of legislation, like for example, in PEI, they've been able to make sure that heckling is completely, eradicated in legislature. I mean, talk about bringing civility back to politics, right? And then bringing it back home to Ontario with Mike Schreiner, like I said earlier, has been able to effectively build coalitions with groups that would normally be, not necessarily green. For example, I'll give you an example. So there was something called Bill 66. This is about a year ago, where the Ford government was trying to essentially punch holes within the green belt and create development opportunities for his friends. And there was quite a bit of blowback from the civil population and civil liberty groups, but it wasn't organized, right? So Mike was effectively able to talk to different groups and essentially create this coalition of people who were opposed to this bill. And he also got different farm associations. He's a farm boy at heart, right? He comes from farm country, and he knows how to talk to farmers and agriculture communities. And so he was able to rally people who normally vote, conservative in rural conservative hinterlands to voice their opinion against this bill. And when conservative MPPs started hearing about potential their own voters, saying that they don't like this bill, then they started rolling it back, and eventually it was defeated. So it's building those coalitions across wide bases of support, and having the ability to talk to anyone. That's something that I find a very effective way of governing, or not governing, but effective way of contributing to your legislature when you're especially a small caucus.
You touched on two things there that I have found to be the most important to me, which are collaboration and communication. Mm-hmm. And I think the power of consensus building, the power of collaboration, being willing to work with anybody, and in that same vein, then using communication and communication skills and methods to say, I'm going to be willing to talk to anybody, and it's going to take a different sort of speaking to actually reach different people, but it's always worth doing, because you can build so much more. And I feel like it involves like a letting go, in a sense, of some of the partisanship that a lot of other parties cling to and say, I want to be effective. And the best way to do that is that. And so those have become some of the most important ideas to me in leadership, is that especially as a Green, to be effective in collaboration and effective in communication, I have felt can kind of get a long way. So it's great to hear. It's great to hear that. And
it's like you said, and that's been the deferring factor for him, like for what the entire GPO's mentality has been, that whenever we bring in any kind of criticism of the government, we always pair it with solutions about what the green answer would be to that question. What is missing from the other opposition parties, the Liberals and the NDP, has been exactly that. It's just noise. So after a while, people tune out because you're just complaining about things and not, stating your own vision of what you would do differently. And when Mike does that, it's very refreshing. And that's exactly one of the reasons why he's doing so well at Queen's Park.
That's so awesome. So the next thing I'm curious about is, what skills have you found the most useful and where did you learn them? And I say this because in the different positions that I've been in kind of leadership of organizations or kind of anything else in my life, I'm always surprised to see where I've developed skills that I actually find the most useful. And in this leadership race, kind of the idea of experience has come up so much. And yet I think it's kind of ill-defined, because kind of just from my own life, what experiences I've actually found useful have not been particularly the ones that would show on paper, because I think that we as people grow through kind of a variety of experience. So I'm curious, kind of what are the skills that you maybe weren't expecting, but to need to use, but you found that you had, and where did you actually gather them?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the very first one that comes to mind is just, the lack of fear when it comes to public speaking. For me, it comes from a very an experience rooted in my childhood. So growing up in India, in Mumbai, I went to this really amazing school. It's called Udyachal, and it is centered around, like this very progressive pedagogy of, it's almost like Waldorf meets like, I don't even know, like the Norwegian style of teaching, almost. And so there had these amazing teachers who, and it's also my love and affinity to nature grew from that, because we used to go to trips to the mangroves, and we used to, go and just have a picnic in the forests and the woodlands that were connected to the school. It was just something that kind of was a very magical childhood experience that created very fond memories of it. But one part of that was that I think this was grade 1 or maybe even kindergarten, but they actually forced us to go on stage. And like, this, maybe this is not the more progressive part of that pedagogy, but essentially it was just go on stage, you have a role, there's no ifs or buts. Like I really don't care about where about, like, even if you don't want to say lines, you have to go on stage. So even if you just want to be like a tree or something, I don't know, you can go and stand on the stage. And I think that, like, obviously there's a lot of fear around that as a kid. And so I remember that sort of just dispelling away. And then when you hear just the applause and the appreciation, it's like, oh, this is kind of nice. Like, you're here with your friends, just having, pretending to be something else, and it's just like you're wearing these cool costumes and you're just having a good time. So I think that kind of early on drove away any kind of fear of public speaking. And I always equate, any public speaking event, is just like, I did that as like a 4-year-old. I think I got this. So basically that's been, I think, one of the foundations of that journey. The political side of things, and also, just more comms and the more messaging part of that skill set, I think just comes from, I don't even know what, just like being in the milieu of political pop culture, like growing up watching The West Wing, growing up watching Yes Minister. So like it's been and I see Brian's here today who recommended Borgen, and I recommend it to everyone else. It's a great show. It's on Netflix if you can find it. It has a great message about collaborative politics. And those kinds of political shows, I find that I grew up around, and I think that has to do with the fact that my grandfather was a member of parliament back in India, and he had inculcated in me this, sense of duty almost, because he's actually one of the reasons why I am in politics, is because he was, one of those rare politicians who actually was in it for the right reasons, especially in India. I mean, Indian politics has become very, very corrupt and disingenuous. And so he was one of the first parliamentarians in independent India. And after he lost his second or third term, he went back to working as a clerk for a small company. And, so my dad grew up in a fair amount of, lower middle class poverty, and lower middle class in India in the 60s is very different to what lower middle class India is now, or even Canada is. And so it was, so my dad didn't grow up in any amount of privilege that would be afforded to a politician's son today. And I think that kind of helped him becoming a more rooted person as well. And so, and I remember going on, just these events in India, and people coming up to me and saying, do you know that your grandfather did that? Or do you know that your grandfather did that? And he never told his own children or anyone in the family about his accomplishments. We all learned about them from other people. And I think that's the kind of politician that I aspire to be. And that's one of the reasons why I joined the Greens, because again, those achievements, as I was mentioning earlier with Mike as well, but even before he was elected, he was ready to let go of the recognition and the credit of doing good work for the sake of that good work being completed, because whoever's in charge wants the credit. And so he often had to do that, and that's one of the reasons why I joined the Greens.
It's very interesting. My grandfather has never spoken about the stuff he's done either to like his entire family. So he's an immigrant from Hong Kong, and my dad's an immigrant from London, England. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting about being put on stage, because I started performing when I was really little, like just random stuff. I did dance, then I did violin, and then more recently I did like 7 years of choir and some opera. But in the meantime, I ended up going to high school at a boarding school in California that was like mandatory performing arts. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of every year, we would have to go up and do what's called song share. So every single student in high school had to get up and sing a cappella, like something in front of the entire school. And then at the end of every year, we actually had an annual performance of the Ramayana. And it would be every single student from kindergarten to grade 12. You had to be in it. Some people were just animals, again, and trees. but actually, like, so everybody else like had to audition. You had to audition and be a part of it. And I think that absolutely trained me. Like, you can't have any fear now. You just go up there, you do it. And it's very, having any sort of like theater training, I think happens to help, and just in that, especially at a young age.
Yeah, there's so much value in theater. I mean, I just love watching theater, but at the same time being part of it. I remember I took grade 10 and grade 11 drama, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I think because, like, that's when I came to Canada was grade 10. And I remember one of the things where I, like early on, it's hard to make friends when you're in a different country. You've, a strange accent. I had a bit of a strong English like because my school was run like an international school, and it was run by Brits. And so, like saying bizarre things like 3 upon 4 rather than 3 over 4 for mathematics, and people look at you weirdly. So to be to be in that drama class, and my teacher was this amazing lady called Miss Heim, who was so welcoming, so accepting, and so I really found a good outlet there, and that's actually where I made many of my few first friendships, and which still intact today. And so I think theater and drama in general have just such good value to like kind of just get into other people's minds, like I think it is almost a quasi empathy building exercise, because it does help you relate. Just makes you wait and think about what other people might look at this from. And so it definitely has a lot of value, as I'm sure is evidenced by both of our experiences.
Yeah, and it's been interesting reflecting on this. I think doing like national scale debates, which is just something. I mean, unless you've done it before, like you the first time you'd ever do that, it's the first time for anybody,
Yeah.
and and kind of realizing that my experience with performance anxiety and performing, it never changes. And I've just learned to get in the group. I always get nervous before anything, but then as soon as I'm out there, I'm like, I'm out, I'm on stage, and it's just gone. And I just recognize that looking back, and it just gets easier over the years. And that I relate to that experience of, not personally, but my mother, so her family immigrated when she was 14, and so she joined mid high school, and is dealing with I had heard from her about dealing with the culture shock a bit, but more the you do have somewhat the language skills already, but it's from a different framing, and from colonies anyway.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, so building on the idea of where you get your skills from, I'm curious about when you've encountered new scenarios. So is there an example of something, mostly because I just love hearing stories, where you were actually prepared for something, but you were expecting that you were going to kind of feel out of place, or that you weren't going to be ready, but it turned out that you actually were?
Preparing for something I thought I would not be ready for, but then I was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
Or I guess rephrased, like, is there a time where you, in a sense, is there an example of a time that you've underestimated yourself, that you were expecting something to be difficult, and then you're like, oh, I actually know how to do this. It's just not, it's because I'm drawing on something that I wasn't expecting to draw on.
Yeah, no, there's a few experiences. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is, I think, yeah, just like immigrating to Canada. I mean, I was dreading the fact when my parents announced it to me. Just it's like, hey guys, we're like leaving the country in like a couple of months. I was like, wait, what? Like, what is happening here? And my dad, he had been talking to his friend for years, and he had applied way back in 2000, but then 9/11 happened, and visas were just stopped completely. And so we had this pause, and my parents had never brought this up to me, and they just sort of mentioned it as like, we were gone for a summer trip into like to the mountains in the Himalayas, and we came back home, and there were the Canadian visas waiting for us in our mailbox. And so there, my mom said, okay, I guess we're going to Canada. It's like, wait, what? I had no idea about this. And like, obviously the first, like, it was shock and like a little bit of anger and just confusion about like, why didn't you tell me this? Like, they did like talk to me and consult with me later about like, should we make this decision? Should do you want to go? But like, I mean, it was kind of like a given by that point. So yeah, I was definitely quite scared of immigrating and coming to a completely new world. Missing friends obviously is a big part of that. And I mean, it was just the cusp of the internet messengers and things. There was MSN Messenger back then, and all those lovely things. So I guess to converse with my friends when I finally came here. But it was hard at first, for sure. We lived in, a basement out in downtown Toronto. It got flooded once. I remember when it rained, and the entire basement just got flooded. And I grew up in a certain amount of privilege back in Mumbai. My parents had good jobs, and I lived in a decent neighborhood, and so this was just big shock to all of us, right? And like, my mom worked in Home Depot when we first came here, and then did 2 jobs at Home Depot and the Toronto Public Library. And like, we had maids back at home, so I didn't know how to do any household chores, and she was the only one who was doing this in the beginning. And so she would break down sometimes, and like, I had no idea about how to go about helping. So like, both dad and I learned how to, help and do household chores. I mean, this is like starting from complete scratch, right? And and yeah, like battling all these toxic masculinity and like weird patriarchal notions of what gender roles are supposed to be, and all that kind of stuff. It was just I mean, thankfully both my parents are pretty progressive about that kind of stuff, but you still have some vestigial stuff in you from your childhood and all that kind of stuff. So it was, yeah, it was hard. And then eventually, I think, like I said, with drama class, with finally making friends, that's when it finally then started getting easier. And I thought, okay, well, at 6 months, I was still like, I still want to go back to India. I can't deal with this right now. But I think after a year, excuse me, after a year, and just being able to sort of find that social circle, find better living arrangements. Eventually, things got better, and I said, okay, well, you know what, this is becoming better, and maybe I can find a life here. And more importantly, my parents were able to do that as well. So I think, yeah, that's a big part of that's that entire, the quote unquote, it's a quintessential immigrant experience, has shaped quite a bit of my understanding, and has shaped my view of politics as well, along with Star Trek, obviously. But it's the scarcity I'd never experienced in Mumbai. I had experienced in my teens, and so to be able to sort of like just look at things and say, can I actually afford that? Looking at being a little more fiscally sound in your own personal finance, and having the wherewithal to say no, is something that I never had experienced back in Mumbai, but that I eventually learned here. So yeah, that sort of personal growth, I sort of never thought. But then, I mean, what do you know, like as a teenager, really, to be able to make those kinds of decisions? But I surprised myself when I was able to overcome them. And then a second thing would actually be when I was asked to run as a candidate for MPP here in Ontario in 2018. And, I thought I always wanted to run for political office, but I never thought that I would do it in my 20s. Like I thought sometimes in my 40s, my 50s, it'd be great. But yeah, I called the Green Party office, and Amy Watson, who was our political director back then, she said, like, this looks great. Like, your resume looks great. Like, would you like I had offered and volunteered to, help out as a staffer or campaign aide, because I was a campaign aide for a Liberal MPP before. And so I wanted to bring those skill sets there. But they completely floored me when they asked me to run instead, and I was just like, whoa, what? Like, what are you talking about? I'm no way suited for this. And then eventually I talked to my parents, I talked to my girlfriend, and we eventually came to a decision that, okay, well, maybe this is actually a good idea, because why not? Like, just start early. And yeah, my campaign went really well. Most of our focus obviously was on Guelph to help elect Mike for the first time as the first Green MPP. But at the same time, I was also campaigning in my own riding and learning a lot from all the campaigns in Guelph. But applying those lessons to my riding and eking out a decent result. And so it was an incredibly amazing and fulfilling learning experience, especially knocking on doors, which I thought I would hate. But then when I eventually wound up doing it is kind of addictive. It was like, I love this. This is amazing. Like I'm connecting with my neighbors who I've like never talked to before, and just learning more about people and what they care about. So it's just like having a conversation right now. And so those are the two things that came to mind with that question.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. I feel like with phone calling and with door knocking, I was so scared, and I still get that like fear of what on earth is it going to be. You're knocking on the door, you're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? And then a person shows up, and you're like, oh, right, I know how to do this. Hi, it's a person. It's lovely, and then you make that connection, and it is like the most beautiful thing, because
Mhm.
that's really it. And especially I think as Greens, when we're showing up, we really are there with the idea of representation. So we're not there to sell anything. We're there to help, and that offer and that openness is just is a beautiful thing. And yeah, I relate to a lot of that, just because I think when I didn't expect to be in politics, then it felt like a necessity. And then I'm like, okay, I guess I'll run. And I'm like, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. Then I feel like, oh, I can do all of this. This is great. It's fine. Just keep going and go back to the details. So I'd like to tie together some themes there around, well, the immigrant experience, but also being young in
Mhm.
politics.
Mhm.
And through this campaign, I've seen others experience, and I've also experienced a bunch of prejudice myself from inside the party and outside. Well, a lot of it's transphobia, but definitely some ageism, some racism as well. And sometimes it's microaggressions. It's not direct statements, but it's just these things that are underlying commentary. And a lot of them I see, especially directed at other people, actually do have that like anti-immigrant sentiment under there somehow, or like not understanding the immigrant experience and instead like putting people down. Like, you must not be, not understanding that our system is actually very broken, and the way that we don't see people as equal other humans when they show up, and that of course even ignores the colonial legacy all to itself. But I think it's like people are steeped in this, so they often don't have any idea, and it's the microaggressions and all that. Similarly, I mean, it's been super positive and lovely, and I've had a bunch of support. But I know that the Green Party of Canada right now is working through dealing with equity and inclusion, really becoming a space of belonging. And I know that the Green Party of Ontario has done some great work on this, and it's going well, as I understand it. So I think we need to learn from you. But I'm curious, what has your experience been in terms of prejudice in the political world
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
changing it?
right. It's Yeah, I mean, like you covered a lot of it. It's been, a variation of it. And and I mean, there was like a few experiences, like even with the canvassing, for example, like going back to that, like I still love it, but there have been some unpleasant experiences at doors. Like I remember at one point, I was knocking on someone's door, and I said, like I did the whole like conversation, and we had a nice conversation, I thought. And then later on I said, so would you be voting Green this year? And the gentleman said, I would, but not for you. And I don't, and I don't know what that meant. I would assume that it was probably a racist comment, but I just said okay, and then he closed the door. And so, like, as much as I try to push it out of my mind, for the most part, like it kept coming back throughout that campaign, and it sort of still lingers, and it takes a while to process all that. Like, it was just completely unnecessary. um, um, and um, and so yeah, those kinds of things. And obviously there were many different incidents in high school as well, being the new immigrant kid, and just sort of kind of also experiencing that when you come into politics, because it is definitely a very small community, especially within the establishment politicians. And to be wanting to become a part of that, it feels very exclusive. And people have these like just ridiculous barriers in place. And so like, for example, in Mississauga, where I first ran, which is a small suburb of Toronto, it had like it has a like an overwhelmingly racially diverse population, its demographics, but the council, the city council, is just predominantly white, and it's it's just completely bizarre. And yeah, again, it's such a close-knit group of political insiders, and that don't want any. I tried to I applied to become part of the Mississauga Environmental Action Group. I was accepted, but when I got there, it was just very much, again, like that whole insiders view of things, and so I was just very uncomfortable with it, and I couldn't see any avenue to change anything about it. So hopefully there's something of an electoral reform motion being considered, and hopefully that leads to a more diversification of that council. But currently, as it stands, it's just impossible to deal with them. Anyways, so all those little experiences and little life events that have happened have definitely made me cognizant of my own privilege, as well as a cisgendered man, a male as well, because it also, I think I have to grapple with that as well, because I do have some shortcomings that I have to deal with as being not shortcomings, but some prejudice that I have to deal with when it comes to being a person of color, but at the same time, some privileges offered as well. And so to kind of balance those and to be able to look at them through that lens has also been sort of a quest of mine, because I want to use my privilege as an ally, and to be able to help those who are less privileged in that through that identity. And so it's and so to sum that point, I love the work that the Green Party of Ontario is currently doing, because and I think it starts with recognizing that we need to do that work because there is a deficiency. And when I was first became part of the provincial executive of the party, there was a recognition about how not just the Green Party, but the environmental movement in general is very much white, upper class, and predominantly men, and older men. And so it's that recognition by Mike himself, by the different leadership is crucial. And so all the other programs that they've implemented, including in 2018, we tried to run a gender balance slate of candidates, and we successfully did that for the first time in Ontario provincial politics. We also tried to include 30% racially diverse candidates, but we were not able to meet that goal. But our organizers actively went out of their way to make sure to recruit candidates, because as much as people accuse others or people who do that of trying to institute tokenism, it's absolutely not, because it's so much harder to find a person of color or a person or a female individual, or a person who is not a cisgendered white male to run for politics, because I remember talking to Velma Morgan of Operation Black Vote, and she told us that to ask a woman to run for political office, you have to ask her about 6 times, and for a person of color, you have to ask about 12 times. And if you ask, a person who is a white man, the volunteer, like when you ask someone to run for political office, the first demographic that puts their hands up is that person. And so it's these systemic barriers that exist, you need to root out by being proactive and asking people to run multiple times. And if you don't do that, it's not going to happen. And so I think there's so much great initiatives that have been started by the Green Party of Ontario staff and the leadership. We also had an inclusivity and equity sort of training done for the entire provincial executive. And we, just kind of to grapple with our own biases and with our own inherent just discriminations that we hold without even knowing. And so it was a very necessary exercise because unless you look inwards, you cannot find the ability to find empathy in others. Like I grew up as, I don't want to bring religion into this. I'm just saying I grew up as a Buddhist growing up. And one of the things that the religion teaches is that without self-love, love for others is nigh impossible. And so if you don't look inwards, find those things within yourselves which you didn't know existed, how are you able to look at the world and through a more objective lens? And so I think all the things that the party currently is doing is so crucial. And I really am proud to be part of this provincial executive, which is so proactively taking all these steps.
That was really well put. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's all right. This is like Zoom life. This is just it's par for the course. If something, happens.
This is my girlfriend's computer, which is probably why you see her photo there beside my name in the participants tab. But yeah, she just got a call there. My bad.
No worries at all. That was all very well said, and I'm so happy that that's going on. And I think I want so many of those lessons to be transferred to the federal party, because I think right now that we're having the struggle of looking in and admitting it. And also I think there's a fear in that, because I don't think people should be afraid of acknowledging that we have shortcomings, because it's an opportunity to grow, and that can be just a beautiful thing. Because it's not, people worry, it's like, am I going to get kicked out? I'm like, no, nobody's going anywhere. We're just going to not tolerate certain behaviors. And that's just even the tiniest piece of it. It's about, understanding where people come from and all the background. And it also changes our communication, because, historically, yes, that's how the environmental movement has been. And there's so many people left out of that, but it also means the way we talk and the way we talk about things is structured around a certain narrative that comes from that background, which is entirely implicit. And changing that is the only way that we start communicating with more people. And, the idea of privileges and using one's privileges is real for me too. Like, I have a complicated intersectional identity, but it's really the empathy that you get from understanding the experience of others. And people's identities do not tell me what their experience of marginalization is. So all I can do is say, yeah, this is real and I want to help. What can I do? Let's work on it. And continue to learn and be open to it. And a lot of the work that I did on diversity and inclusion, that's what I got from it, was that everybody can help and everybody has their own story. And so you cannot be based on tick boxes about what people's experiences have been. And I think we all, no matter what that is too, there's always an admission of, well, what do I have that I can give? And being aware of that, because I don't think, because it's just so much more complicated. Life is more complicated than all of that stuff. And I really liked what you said about, getting and finding diverse candidates, because I have an issue with hard quotas being kind of the only thing that you do, and kind of being hard in the first place, and that you search, and that's kind of all. Sometimes people say that's the be all end all of it, and that in itself, would end up with tokenizing. But basically, that it's also necessary to say we're going to go find people, and when it's such a big deal for people to say yes, it's about pure representation. It's about democracy at its finest, at its heart, that we need to be promoting. And so, I don't think that saying we must achieve these, but just have something that you're striving for. for representation, I think is really important. And then to create the environment around it where when you have people there from different backgrounds, it's that they don't exist. The tokenizing comes from whether they're treated like they're only there because of their identity, or whether it's because they're being welcomed and saying, we're really happy to have you here for everything in your experience, but also the perspective that you bring from lived experience. And yeah, it's great because I think that, you know, once you have that, then you can say, yeah, here's our goals. Let's see if we can get people to run to build these numbers basically. And it's one of those things that's better as a positive goal than people feeling like they have to do it. You know, it's like I'm dragging my feet to get, and then you definitely end up with people not feeling right. But there's totally good ways to do it.
Yeah, no.
And,
I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree. I can, like, you know, tell from my own experiences when, like, I came here from India, I had a pretty conservative-esque and, you know, sort of closed world view of things, you know? And so I remember coming across a gay couple on the TDC for the first time, and not being like homophobic in terms of repulsion to that, but just I hadn't even understood that as a concept that could exist, right? Like the ignorance of it is so powerful a force that it completely warps your mind and says, wait, what the hell? Like, what is happening here? And so to sort of understand, and again, just say that, I mean, it's people loving other people at the end of the day. That framing of saying that, you know, of turning away from, you know, this like weird derisive thing that homophobic people use, and turning it to love is, well, it's love. I mean, who doesn't like love, right? And so it's important to have those people who can change the way that you look at things just by using different words. And I think it's important that we remember that, because it is such a crucial lesson. I remember the first, you know, that like when I first, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's the one who sort of did this for me. And he actually forced me to watch the movie Philadelphia. And bizarrely enough, that's what changed not only my perspective, but then I made sure my parents watched it, and then it actually helped change their perspective about, you know, the LGBTQ community. And so I think, you know, as much as we like to deride Hollywood and, you know, the film industry, I think there's a valuable contribution there about making it more personal and making it more understandable for people who haven't had those experiences. And so, so yeah, Tom Hanks, salute to you, and Denzel Washington as well. So yeah, it was just one of, and it still is one of my favorite movies.
there's a tremendous amount of power in good storytelling.
Yeah,
for sure. And yeah, there's gratitude for that, for wherever it comes from. And yeah, I think there is so much work to do in terms of outreach, and the intent is important. And I think the inside work of making it a joyful thing to do, and something we all want to do, where people want the people to be there and represented. And instead of being like, oh, okay, the people actually have that preference, they don't try to work against it. Because I think that's when you get into the issues. And yeah, I mean, the joy in it and the beauty in it, it does really come from the storytelling and the bridge building, the people starting to understand where other people come from and saying, wow, that's really important. Let's integrate this perspective, because it will make us a stronger and better whole overall.
Yep. Yeah,
so
completely agreed.
So the last topic for the night, just to close out before we open the floor to questions, is about leadership. And I think, you know, I'm not sure that I came into this with a full concept of what I thought leadership was really about. I had my experiences of it where I kind of have ended up in positions of leadership because I volunteer to do the work, and then everybody comes to me, and then you get given the power and you're like, well, I better take the responsibility. And then you find yourself in charge of things or in charge of people. And then to make use of that, I think there's a couple more things. And so to me now, I find that the most important parts of it are fostering collaboration, facilitating work and community growth and development of anything, projects, work, whatever it is, helping people, you know, build those bridges, then also communicating well, and kind of giving some overall structure and direction, but more than anything else, kind of empowering people. But not just empowering people, because it feels like I'm not giving you the power, because I'm not comfortable with a lot of power. It's more like, let's distribute the power, but let's use the positions that people are in effectively to help others. And it's more like helping people along their own paths to empowerment. It's like, how did I find myself in positions that then I realized that I had power, and I'm like, I better use this. It's like that. It's like the same side of the privilege thing. It's like, oh, I have something here. Let me best put it to use. And so that's now kind of the complex idea of like, what is it that anybody brings, and there's so many different facets to leadership. And so to me, yeah, it's about collaboration, facilitation, communication, and, a bit of direction, but mostly empowerment and building. And some pieces of that are more complicated, like having an identity makes me a representative, even if I don't really want to talk about it, or stuff like that. And already kind of being a representative is interesting of a group. But I'm curious. So what does leadership mean to you?
I mean, it's so much of what you've already covered. I mean, it's important to define leadership. I mean, leadership is often defined by your relationship to power, right? And power is about making decisions. The ability to make decisions. I think that could be a good way to define power. I think, yeah, like you mentioned, the collaborative structure of leadership, or the collaborative model of leadership, is so beneficial because it has the ability to tap multiple human points of potential, right? Because it expands your ability, your skill set to encompass this vast majority of human beings. I think that is something that is completely undervalued and underutilized in politics anywhere in the world, including Canada. And so the ability to recognize that other people have contributions to make, that you have lived experiences that you've never had, who have the ability to make a point that you would never be able to come to realize, needs a certain amount of humility. And I think not a certain amount, a great deal of humility. And it I think is something that I have come to understand. Growing up as in my early 20s, like I would think the majority of folks, there was a certain, amount of invincibility, mortality that's associated with, with youth, and also the amount of arrogance and cockiness that comes along with it. And so, I wasn't the most pleasant of people. And I can look back and, make that observation. I don't judge my past, but I'm just understanding that I would not be friends with that guy today. And so it's it's making sure that you recognize that part. And I went through some really hard stuff in my mid-20s, which gave me that humility to be able to recognize that the arrogance and the cockiness is just utterly useless. It gives you just a fake sense of control and power, which just does not exist. I mean, I'm a fellow space nerd myself, as I've mentioned before, nowhere near a PhD in astrophysics, but I, dabble in amateur astronomy, and I always love the sense of humility that a cosmic vision gives you, because as we've talked about this before, Carl Sagan said it best: we live on a tiny blue dot suspended on a sunbeam, and it is something to be always cognizant of, because that sense of grandeur, or that sense of power going to your head, always needs to be neutered by that vision, because at the end of the day, we're here only for this tiny span within the galactic vision that is our entire cosmic history. And so to sum it all up, essentially, I think you need to pair leadership with humility, because if you don't, then it leads to abuse of power, plain and simple. How do you do it is a much harder question, because it is so easy to be, like, you can be I think the best of people, and our best literature attests to that fact, right? I mean, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and at the end, even Frodo, even good old Frodo, refuses to drop the ring. Sorry, spoiler alert, by the way, by the folks, if you haven't read or seen the movies. But he doesn't drop the ring into Mount Doom, right? And it is uh, it is a commentary on the seductive nature of power, and so to be able to combat that requires that lived experience of having gone through so much to understand the fickle nature and fallibility of the human condition. I think is an important part of leadership.
Great. I yes, absolutely. And that perspective, I think, is something that cosmic perspective is something, well, actually, I'm going to add to that. I'm going to say both humility and the cosmic perspective is something that we need as humanity a bit more. Mm-hmm. And I'm stuck with the cosmic perspective, just like permanently, just having done it. I'm like, okay, I just somewhere else, and experiencing this as just weird, right? All of civilization seems constructed improperly to me. The way we treat each other, the way we live here just doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I exist in that time span of like blink of an eye. What can I do? And it also gives us a huge responsibility. I mean, to be alive, to be a conscious piece of the universe is an amazing thing. And that just makes it, to me, more tragic the way we live, given the opportunities. And that's in a sense also what drives me. It's like, I want to change that for this, because sometimes if you go too far into that perspective, you're like, none of it matters then. But I find that it's the opposite. It gives everything a deep, deep meaning. And like, yeah, I'm just somewhere in the Hubble deep field most of the time, looking back like, hello. But that idea of that perspective is something that has historically brought people together. The astronomy, the sense of being here with everybody else, and it makes our differences, a little less deep, or a little shallower. And humility as well. Like, so many of us in our lives, it's easy to get carried away and feel like everything is huge and impacts are big, but also, in this struggle with the conversation around climate change, where it's humans have a huge impact and we need to be aware of that huge impact. But we also need to be humble, because like, we think we're so great, we know everything, and yet what have we done? And we've lost touch with the world around us, and merging those would be something good for everybody to see, and for certainly international everything to see.
Agreed, heartily agreed. Yeah, no, I would recommend, I think they took these videos off of YouTube, but there was something called the Sagan series that were on YouTube for a while, which essentially is Carl Sagan narrating his book to a beautiful visuals. And it's just so well done. So I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but if you can search Sagan series, you might find it. Yeah, like there's this one line from The Pale Blue Dot, I think, which, like, it just encompasses it all about the humility that you talked about, is, all the kings, all the lovers, all the tyrants, all the dictators, all the poets, scientists, mathematicians, all of them have lived just on that pale, tiny blue dot in the middle of nowhere, right? Like like we grandize ourselves, we're this intelligent species who, has done so much, but really, like, and also the fact that, people are fighting each other. Just the futility of war is expressed by that feeling of people are fighting over just so that they can be, momentary masters of a fraction or pixel of that dot. So it is just such a beautiful way of making, like laying bare just the bizarreness of all of human activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we've got about 15 minutes for, a little more than 20 minutes for questions now, if anyone would like to ask. Either of us or both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Or comment. I'm fine with comment too. If people want to add to the conversation, please do. Again, we're in a lounge on a starship.
So Stephanie has their hand up. So I'll go to Stephanie first. If anybody else wants to jump in, please use the raise hand button or post your question in the chat.
Hi, Stephanie is my name. My pronouns are they, them. I'm on traditional Siksikapi territory as well as Treaty 7 and Métis 3 region, also known as Lethbridge, Alberta. So I had the experience of running as identifying female for local government, and then as a gender individual for the federal election, this last election, along with disabilities. So, you know, good times all around. But some of the barriers that I came across, especially being from a smaller center, is the lack of resources to help with like building that leadership skill. Because I think like both you and Amita, we have all had life experiences that led us to a leadership role that led us into getting involved in politics and stuff. But a lot of people, it takes either a cause that is very near and dear, which was my case, where I was like, hey, this needs to be talked about on this platform and this is the opportunity. But there's a lot of people in the shadows who really want to step forward, but just don't know how, and the fear of what they're going to encounter because they have these differences is quite large. So I know something that I had talked with a local group here in Lethbridge was trying to create workshops to help develop leaders for that kind of thing. And I guess my question is does anyone know of any provincial or federal ones that we could maybe like tie into, or we could start sharing more so that we can encourage more people from different walks of life to get involved in these higher levels of government?
Okay, Amita, do you want to go first, or?
I'm not sure, honestly. So I know that there are some organizations that help people from, you know, more diverse, you know, they're varieties depending on identity, basically, to say, you know, people who experience some form of marginalization, but some are very particular to racialized people or whatever, but that help. And I think there are also some organizations that do leadership training that are tied to the partisan think tanks. Mm-hmm. So there are some, but I don't see them as prominent enough or kind of accessible enough at the moment, because I think a lot of other leadership development seminars are often not aimed at politics. There's a lot of those around, I think, where you have people like, well, develop leadership skills. And it's like, are you telling me how to become a good manager? Because I don't want to do that. Like there's so many different skills applicable to politics. And I definitely felt after the last election that we need an organization that helps also building community around people that have, you know, experienced prejudice, marginalization, and oppression, and systemic violence and oppression as well, that, you know, can give people the environment and the strength to run, because it is so hard to do that. And also do some of that encouraging people, just like it doesn't really matter what party you run for. We want to give you the space, we want to give you the skills in whatever you need, because it can be very different. So, but I personally don't know of anyone doing that in the way that I would actually see as necessary. So I'm hoping that for the party itself going forward, that we can provide as much of that as possible to candidates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and out here in Ontario, we have a few organizations, who do that as well. But again, it's targeting specific communities. So there, as I mentioned earlier, there's Operation Black Vote here in Ontario that helps and promotes people who identify as Black to run for political office, and endorse them during campaigns. Similarly, there exist groups for different communities as well. So I think going to them for any kind of help or advice would be a good idea. Again, individually as a person, I always encourage people, if they reach out to me for any kind of thing, and especially if they're from a marginalized community, then I make sure that I encourage them to consider running again, because you have to be proactive about it. You have to ask them multiple times, and only then will people even think about saying yes. But that is on an individual level, and I think this needs to be more systemic. It cannot be just relegated to people to be able to do that. So I think I don't know the answer to what the systemic answer will be to that question. Making the process as transparent as possible, as being as receptive as possible to people's queries and questions when they arise, I think is a good way. If anyone ever asks me things on Twitter or any of my social media posts, I try to answer, especially if they're, earnestly trying to learn about the political process. Because a lot of the time, again, as I mentioned earlier, it seems very exclusive, and people, throwing out even political terms, and the language itself is very exclusive sometimes, very exclusionary. So democratizing it a bit and just stepping back and recognizing those things, I think, is a good way to start. But I think we're still searching for the systemic answer to that.
I was just thinking about adding that about the barriers to entry and the feeling that I think a lot of people have that they just can't participate. And I think at some point I just decided, against some necessity, I'm like, okay, I have to go do this now. But generally, I've met so many people who say, well, I don't know anything about it. I feel bad. I can't join a campaign because I don't know anything. And they feel like either because of actual experiences where people put you down for not knowing, or by the culture of it's an inside thing to do politics. Either one, people don't feel like they can show up and do it, whether that's working on campaigns or becoming a candidate. And I mean, my experience is a lot of people who are elected don't know anything about government. So it shouldn't be, but that apparent barrier, which is a very real barrier, needs to be worked on, I think, by all of us. And that would be one of the systemic things to do. And I think especially those of us who are connected to the other side of that, because there are so many people in politics that accidentally perpetuate that culture because they always felt like it was for them. And so for everybody that it doesn't feel like for you, and again, isn't entirely identity related, it's like we're missing representation from groups outside of identity markers as well, just because it's like, oh, well, no, politics isn't for me. Why would, and it should be about representation. So it needs to have people from different backgrounds that basically represent that as well.
Agreed. Did that help, Stephanie?
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry, I have to rush, but thank you so much for creating this space tonight. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Bye.
So next up we have.
Hello.
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 Hey. So my question may be kind of a similar theme to the last one. I'm going to throw out a suggestion quickly for whoever the leader is on your theme of collaboration and communication. Maybe somebody could communicate with Equal Voice, Black Vote, all of those organizations, and actually connect them with Elections Canada to actually make sure that, there's all of those groups that have been advocating for more representation and trying to really give people the resources to access it are federally combined and encouraged through a nonpartisan. So I think that would be cool. But my question, I guess, and Steve Aiken did a little episode about merit, degrees, and representation in government. So it's kind of on that theme. At this point, when so many jobs require a degree, And especially in politics and with the Green Party, we're trying to build, we want to be taken seriously. We are science-based. So we want those professionals, those educated people to really represent our party. But how do we make sure that people, you know, who may have some skills, or that voice of lower income, marginalized people, because again, a majority of those people have barriers to accessing that higher education. So how do we make sure that we are including actually people of all backgrounds, you know, and making sure that we are giving credit for life experiences, lessons learned maybe non-traditionally, and also opening it up, but still making sure that we are professional, we are science-based, that we still have that level of professionalism. If you have any thoughts on that.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I think it starts because I am a marginalized person with a higher degree. And going through the academic system, I don't believe in it. Fundamentally, I don't think that the skills that I have from having a degree aren't things I could have gotten elsewhere. So I don't actually, like, I see that societal requirement, and I find it very problematic, because I think it is a systemic method of prejudice and marginalization, and it segregates in a way that is disappointing. So for me, I would just try to break that down when I see it. And so I get this all the time. I get respect for having my PhD, and I try to deflect it. I try to say, look, this is a matter of being able to have gone through the system. And does it say something about me? Sure, but it probably doesn't say the same things as one might expect. And so it also can diminish other things. If you get too steeped in that culture, you can actually, you know, there's a certain hierarchical way of thinking or different things that you can get from it that aren't particularly positive. So you want to be able to have other things. And I completely think that the best skills and the best strengths that people have are from lived experience. And that those lived experiences can come from anywhere. And some of the lived experiences that I have that give me what I feel like I need for this moment came from while I was in academia, but they actually happen to be experiences of marginalization and being pushed out of a system that I didn't seem to belong in and still succeeded in. But it's that fighting the system that I felt like has given me something that I needed. So I try to question the premise, and, you know, people will say, but, oh, well, this person has a PhD. I will always say, so what? What does it actually tell you? Not much till you meet the person and find out. So it's that there's a systemic breaking down that happens. And then I think there's a understanding of how we actually source evidence and scientific backed material. So yes, you do need to be having to check with experts, but it also means you check with people with lived experience. You can't do anything and have good policy through a purely academic lens. So it's good to have somebody, I think, with scientific background organizing it, but also needs to be exactly with that idea of inclusion, and with balancing it out, saying that, you know, you can't tell from anything like that, and it's about changing the system itself to reflect that, I suppose. And there are, I guess, multiple methods of instituting it, but I would say the core always has to be questioning the system and the assumptions that, you know, society absolutely makes about the abilities of somebody based on education. And then just providing access to more education for everybody in general, but knowing that, you know, that still only creates us to be a particular way, and we should be encouraging questioning the system and critical thought.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything after that. You basically check. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, like that GIF comes to mind. Well, it was a commercial before that. It's like, why not both? You know, like it's essentially that, because as Amita mentioned, the formalization of the education process doesn't necessarily give it greater merit, because yeah, the knowledge that you can gain from that system is now democratized by the internet, right? Like you can actually get it anywhere. There's even degrees online now. But that's beside the point. Just the fact that, yeah, I think pairing both those things together, they complement each other, and they inform your decision at a higher level. And so I think taking one or the other is just such a dysfunctional way of looking at it, because the crux of an informed decision needs to be a marriage of the two, essentially, right? Because how can you understand any kind of formalized knowledge without the lived experience to be able to explain those things, and sometimes vice versa as well. So lived experience, I think, is even greater a quality, as again, I think Amita mentioned that, but I think there's just no doing away with it. It needs to be part of that process.
I completely agree. I think that it comes to the concept that now we term balanced leadership. You know, it's about weighing different things. It's about bringing things together. And it's not about saying I find the middle between different things. Mm-hmm. It's about incorporating both points of view, or all points of view, and mm-hmm. finding them important. And I think with the academic background, especially from the scientific point of view, we do need more scientists to use the scientific method, not just, like, okay, finding evidence, but there is a way to do it. But it's also, how you incorporate that. You want people from the scientific community also with other experiences, not just that. And then you can also incorporate that into policy without having those people always being the representatives. Like, I think we need a science officer in every ministry. I think we need this for Parliament in general. We need to have a way of having evidence-based backing and checking with experts and going through that process and kind of teaching the process of the creation of evidence-based policy to everyone, democratizing that. But absolutely, it is lived experience that needs representation. And if we're talking about that concept of representation in democracy, you want to have some scientists in government because we have scientists. And then how you form your policy is it's behind the scenes, and then you should be checking with everything. But one of the things that I've so much appreciated recently politically is AOC, in the sense that, she's amazing, right? She's brilliant. She's compassionate. She's empathetic. She's willing to stick it to people, to speak truth. She was a bartender, right? But that concept that people have put her down for being a bartender and not being ready for it, it's like, it says nothing. Also, we need representation of bartenders in government, because that's part of what representation in democracy actually means. So I think that there's, I would separate it into two things. Here is how you should be aiming to seek to have representation in a democratic context, in that you want to have people who are there because they believe in representing their constituents, not in party ideology being delivered to people. And you also want to make sure that it's somewhat representative of everybody in your country, different ways of living, different communities of every kind. And then on the policy development side, you want to make sure that the voices and the ideas that are incorporated are balanced between, just pure evidence, concept, idea, and really just fully informed by everyone's lived experience, because that people are who are affected by policy. And so that to me is actually part of evidence-based policymaking, is that you cannot separate the fact that this has been put onto people, and they're the ones who have to deal with the actual aspects of however you write legislation. And then also the fact that from a scientific point of view, it's not just about looking at evidence, it's about stating your assumptions and the vision that you're going for, because without that, you can't properly consult evidence. And in even that, there is some, it's not about it. Again, it's not about an ideology, but it is about intention. The example I tend to use is about housing. Am I trying to solve homelessness? Or do I believe that the status quo system works and I just want to build more units? And you will get very different outcomes, but you can use evidence for either of those things. And one of them, I think, puts more focus on the experience of people and the things that need to be changed, and the other on the system and how it functions. So right now, we're definitely weighed too heavily to the pure evidence system side, and it needs to be moved to the personal.
Yeah, and I also want to just give a shout out to you, Amita, because we talked about this, but the fact that politics is just saturated with either business people or lawyers, and I mean, I love all the lawyers that are on the Green Party Canada leadership around as well. I mean, I adore them, and the mayors and the cabinet ministers and all of them that are there. But I love the fact that an astrophysicist and you, Dr. Kuttner, and a physician in Dr. Howard is part of this process, and the kind of experiences and the just the breath of fresh air of the insights that you both bring to this race is absolutely invaluable, because we need more doctors, we need more scientists, we need more bartenders, we need more any kind of vocational diversity that exists out there in politics, because it cannot be just lawyers and business people. And I'm so glad that both of you decided to do this.
Thanks. I agree. We've reached the end of our time. I hope that answered the question about incorporating such things. I just like to end by saying thank you so much for being here. And if anyone's interested, we always still need people to make calls, and you're welcome to join our lovely community and team that I'm very grateful for, and therefore having a fine week, even though this is the chaotic end to a long campaign. But also that please, 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 please vote before 3:30 Pacific on Saturday, as early as possible. And I know some people are still getting their ballots sent out because of joining deadlines and all that other stuff. Check your inbox for Simply Voting, check your spam, all that stuff. Remember to do it. Rank some candidates, please. And if you have any questions, contact the party, or you can actually contact us and we'll try to get in touch with the right places. And you can do that on our website or by emailing info@amitakattner.ca. And thank you everybody for coming tonight. And thank you for those who are listening to this later. And with that, I suppose I say thank you for joining Captain and some officers on 10 Forward, and live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Take care all.